Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads. Chess is a difficult game to learn. Even if you learn it, you still need to maintain your knowledge, and the best way to do it is to keep practicing and playing. Today, we have another classic. The two rivals who are competing know each other pretty well, and have much in common. Though some say the two were not friends, we might strongly want to disagree. Kasparov and Tal were extremely competitive against each other when it come to the game, but did have a close and friendly friendship with one another. The two were similar in so many different ways, but when it came to their playing styles, these were completely the opposite. Kasparov followed the conventional channels, and Tal was often characterized as playing wrong chess. At the same time he was entertaining, and very combinational. We can even go on to say, Mikhail Tal resembled Paul Morphy in so many ways. Today's game between the two giants is not our first choice, but someone has to cover it. Taking this from facts, Tal himself was no classical player but loved encounters of the short kind. Kasparov, he could do both, but would you say he liked spending his time thinking, or was he as fast as Tal? This game we have today was the last time Kasparov and Tal played. Please note this one was played on the 28th of May 1992, and Mikhail Tal passed away a month later on the 28th of June 1992. Shall we see what happened here? With Tal taking this side, he opted for his favorite first move. Kasparov answered with the Sicilian, and now with knight f3, Kasparov chooses for this avenue of play. With the game played in Moscow, Russia, any ideas what Tal went for? Well, it was a hint. He bypasses the push to d4, and goes for this bishop check. It looks like the Rossolimo but not quite, and this is why we said this opening looks like the Rossolimo. This opening has all the signs of the Moscow in the Sicilian variation. This come into effect with how Kasparov answered. It was via this move. The Rossolimo does not involve the move to d6, and comes into effect with e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, and with bishop b5. Another very similar variation is the mainline canal attack, which comes into play by blocking the check with the bishop. Which one approach is considered to be more effective? Well, it depends what side we are looking at. Though either side line is as good as the other, defo more aggressive is to bring the bishop out because you will be forcing some course of action. Tal can take, retreat the bishop, or go for any move to cover the bishop. He has two possible pawn pushes. He also has two possible knight jumps, and another possible option could be to get the queen involved. With the way Kasparov moved forwards, there was no need to cover the bishop. Tal here opted for this push to d4, and rather than take the pawn, Kasparov introduces the second knight into the game. With Tal here opting to get his king to safety, Kasparov wanted this bishop on b5 to go, and in this light he simply attacked him. With the bishop coming off, there are many reasons why you do not want to capture with the bishop or the queen. If you do, you would be looking at the knight coming under fire, and should the two pawns on e5 depart, this knight on f6 would not have much leeway. Though h5 looks like an option, and though knight on the 4th may look feasible, the only safe bet would be to return him right back to where he came from. For this very reason, and to avoid what we just saw, Kasparov captured the bishop with the knight. What you can play here is this move to d5 because it solidifies the center. If you also go for something like c4, it might be very hard to break up this pawn formation. You can always answer with something like g6 or knight f6. Knight f6, for example, just to be able to allow the bishop on c8 some potential, can lead to this queen repositioning. It does not stop the pin from g4 using the bishop, but this would not be that bad, and particularly when you introduce this knight move to allow the queen to come out, without having to face any unpleasant music. Coming back to the game, we saw a different twist to this line. Tal developed the knight first, Kasparov chooses for this push to e6, and what this move allowed Tal to do, was to come in with this attack on the queen. This attack looks like a blank for many reasons. You can easily introduce the bishop to challenge the opposing bishop. Move number 2. It might be easier to straight away attack the bishop with the pawn, or even get the knight to jump into f6. This last move is the one that is not going to work, but we are going to skip this line of play. If you want, you can always experiment with the what-ifs at your own time. Kasparov did not see fit to challenge the bishop, which also means he opted for a queen move. This is what he did. How strong was queen c7? Can we find out? With this game being a blitz, you are bound to see many mistakes from both sides. This is expected, but it is the player who is able to capitalizes and the player who gets there in the end with an extra point under their belt. There is one exception to the rule and we shall endeavor to make this clear before the end of this video. One idea is to come in with this push to d5, forcing in a way an action or a reaction if you like. If you do not go for e5, at best this is this push to b5, and should you take and take, is this opening on the king side going to matter, and if so, to what extent? Is there a way Tal could break through Kasparov's defenses? This knight jump to the rim can look like something, but once you allow the knight to find this outpost, a queen check from h5 has to be one move too short. Try and work this one out. What if you went for this attack on the knight instead? With the knight now forced back, now you can try this queen move, and we know g6 never works, or better said, works in favor of Tal. The absolute best move to go for would be to get this bishop move going, and let Tal to do what he wants to do. With all this in mind, Tal decided for this rook repositioning. This pawn came off immediately, and it was a choice how to take using the knight or queen. Tal used the knight. Remember that knight move into e5 we looked at earlier. This was exactly how Kasparov played it. If you want the knight out of the way, you need to attack him with f4, but Tal was not willing to do this, or at least that was the consensus. How wrong were we? Tal did just this. But instead of getting the knight to back off, Kasparov finds the right moment to reciprocate this attack. You attack my knight and I attack your bishop. With the bishop backing off, Kasparov intensified the situation via this move, and Tal was thinking how to respond. He said bring it on. He took the knight, this bishop also fell, and one idea is to get in this queen move. It looks fine and just in time to be able to hold on to this pawn in the center of the board. Also what queen h5 does, is to attack this pawn on h4. If you want to save the pawn on h4, this would not require too much thinking. The question you need to answer is whether to allocate resources to rescue the pawn or find some other move way more interesting than saving the lone pawn. Though one option is to take this pawn on e5, option number 2 would be to apply this pin. Rook d1, which looks to be right in time, is most likely to lead to this bishop finding the diagonal, and this would be the point where the game could become an eyebrow-raising event. We need to return to the game to check out how the game unfolded. Tal took in the center, and allows Kasparov to increase his piece mobility. As soon as this pawn came off, and Kasparov used the bishop to do the job, what you would expect to see here is this push to h3. If you go for this move, how would you feel about this attack landing on your doorstep? Alternatively, if you don't fancy this attack, what would this pin do on the knight? Does a move like knight c3 to e2 work? Never in a million years, because of e5 and the knight would need to drop. What does appear to work is to get the king to find the corner. The real party may get underway if you intensify the attack on the knight using the queen. Go for this, and when this fork appears, you might also realize that not only you are over-optimistic, but you would have blown your chances big time, and for what? This may not be as clear as it seems, but for sure the bishop and knight are going to come off, but it is what follows that you will be interested in. We are not going there to be able to keep this video as short as we can. Coming back to the game, no one really expected to see the move Tal rolled out, and this is why Tal himself was such an unconventional player. He tried a very awkward line, but can you try and work out what he decided to do and how far he went? It was here, he threw the knight in with this crazy attack. Is this a blunder or some sort of brilliancy? With the attack on the queen and a very likely check from f6 if this queen on c7 does not occupy d8, Kasparov, very fast, calculated that it might be safe to get rid of the knight and take his chances. As soon as the knight departed, this is what Tal was looking at. He arrested the pawn with a discovered check. The king now is in a way forced to this outpost, and now via this queen repositioning, for some reason, Kasparov dropped a full point and Tal simply wins. Can anyone who is watching try and explain this one? If you are not familiar with how the very last game between Tal and Kasparov went, this is the time to know. Though Kasparov has a badly positioned king, and though Kasparov is up by a full minor piece, how dangerous is the knight on d4 and how does he compare to the bishop pair Kasparov has? Let's stretch out what we have and we are going to come back to explain. If you take here on h2, king h1, and now nothing but this queen move, just to try and force off the queens, and we know if the queens go, this would not make it any easier for Tal. If you try this nifty move, you really need to be careful, and particularly careful when your time is ticking down fast. This kingside rook must make a move because if you leave him there, this would be a total game changer. Shall we demonstrate? Both knight e6 and knight f5 works a treat. Let's try only one of these lines and let's use this knight move. Rook g8, which is now a must, will get you in with this very painful check, and because the king has nowhere to go, this queen on f4 must return to block it. Once you allow the queen to drop, the mate would now be in sight, and this is how you would end winning an otherwise lost game. Coming back, if you go for this rook move, are you out of the woods? This move should be sufficient to hold black in the lead. If you come in with this check, taking the knight with the pawn, is going to hurt. When this appears, does it mean it is game over? There might just be a way out, but you can now rule out a clear win. King g8, take the queen, take the rook, and this endgame is going to be very hard to win, and we are talking from both perspectives. If we come back to this hypothetical line, what appears to be correct, is to remove the knight with the bishop, because when you capture, this is what you are looking to getting in. This would be an extremely powerful attack to get in. At best, you can squeeze in this last-minute check, or you can try this attack on the queen. Rook f1 looks a bit stronger, but would it be enough? Queen d6, and now this queen move, and you are most likely looking at a mate in 2. The only move to stop it all, would be to get the queen involved, and once this move materializes, you can begin to wrap things up here. Coming back to the final point and where the game ended, we are going to go all the way back to the title we gave this game. Garry Kasparov was in every single sense totally superior from start to end and yet pays the ultimate prize against Mikhail Tal in their very last game. So what was it he paid and why did he lose? We are going to do this differently. Let us introduce this picture, and as we said before, you can make more mistakes than your rival, you can blunder repeatedly, and your opponent can outclass you in this specific game, but this chess clock is the answer to the ultimate prize Kasparov paid. His being on the right hand was simply flagged, and this is how Kasparov lost an otherwise won game. The other exception here is that even if you get flagged, you can still claim a draw, and this happens when your opponent has insufficient material to win the game. Only then you can claim a draw, but you must claim it. And this was the very last game that was played between Garry Kasparov and Mikhail Tal. It is not the game we wanted to feature to show, but we wanted to get a clear message out to all the viewers. Playing the game is one thing, but knowing the regulations that govern chess are as important. We draw your attention to one game we covered previously, and please have a look at it by clicking the top right of your screen. This had been one game that sparked controversy across the chess community, but in the end, it was interpreted as the right decision to take. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this game and look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless.